be...
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, have we all just had that notice that we're being recorded? Yeah, so just a real moment for us to take that leadership, not just within student accommodation, but across the sectors, to say, yeah, this issue you've just found, we know and we're on it, and we can provide some of the solutions and be the leaders in righting this wrong. So I thought that was very timely. You'll see those come out tomorrow. What we have got in store for you today, and I'm going to put a slide deck up in a minute, is Sam's going to take you through an activity just to get us into a good mindset for this. I'm going to go through the findings, but very briefly. So the research has been out for a while. Some of you will have seen them presented before. So I want to go through those just as a recap mainly, but really to sort of foreground the student voice. And to talk about the case for change, but also to talk about some of the actions that can be taken. So drawing on some of the events that we've done already, so the QUBO Res Life Conference being one of those, to give you some thoughts, a playback of some thoughts about actions that can be taken. And we also want to tell you about the Commission, which Sarah has already mentioned, and that Melissa Brown is on behalf of QUBO, and talk about how that can help you make change as well and get some ideas from you. So that's a bit of a quick overview of what we've got in store, but we're really happy to get your questions and your comments as we go through on the chat or by putting your hand up, because we want to have a conversation. So let me now attempt to share my screen. And can you see my screen now? And I will now hand over to Sam.
Hi everyone, thank you Jenny, and thanks for having me today. As Jenny mentioned, this is just a little bit of an opportunity for us to kind of get into the right mindset in order to have a meaningful conversation about this subject. Some of you, if you were at the Res Life conference, will have been through this exercise before, but I always find that it's really powerful no matter how many times I do it. So just to start off with, feel free to turn off your cameras if you need to. This is absolutely about confronting your own thoughts around privileges. Sometimes we don't notice them because they're so ingrained in our culture, and we're confronted on a daily basis with cultural and social norms that may be related to certain groups' privilege. We're also confronted with marginalised communities and perspectives that deserve to have a voice, as we can see it for an example in the research, and understanding and acknowledging privileges is key to understanding why and how we react to perceive our surroundings. So I'm going to just take you through a few statements, and I'm going to ask you to put a finger up or down in response. So if you start with 8 fingers up, and I'm going to just read out a few statements. So, put a finger down if you are left-handed. Put a finger down if English is not your first language. Put a finger down if neither of your parents have a degree. Put a finger down if you can't find plasters at mainstream shops designed to blend in with or match your skin tone. If you've regularly worked with people you felt like were like yourself, put a finger up. Put a finger down if you constantly feel unsafe walking alone at night. If you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, put a finger up. If you were ever made fun of or bullied for something that you could not change or was beyond your control, put a finger down. If you would never think twice about calling the police when trouble occurs, put a finger up. If you can't show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, put a finger down. If you ever had to skip a meal or were hungry because there was not enough money to buy food, put a finger down. If you have a physical, visible disability, put a finger down. If you have an invisible illness or disability, put a finger down. If you were ever discouraged from an activity because of race, class, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, put a finger down. If you feel good about how your identities are portrayed by the media, put a finger up. If you were ever accepted for something you applied to because of your association with a friend or family member, put a finger up. If you come from a single parent household, put a finger down. If you live in an area with crime and drug activity, put a finger down. If you were ever uncomfortable about a joke related to your race, religion, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation, but felt unsafe to confront the situation, put a finger down. If you were never asked to speak on behalf of a group of people who share an identity with you, put a finger up. If you can make mistakes and not have people attribute your behaviour to flaws in your racial or gender group, put a finger up. If you went to university, put a finger up. If your parents told you that you can be anything that you want to be, put a finger up. So normally, you'd all be stood in a room, taking steps forward and back to be able to see where others have stood and really get an idea of what privilege looks like. But the real point of this is to understand that all of us have different starting points. However, all of us also have the right to be in the race. And the work that we are doing and the work that I do is all about trying to level that playing field, giving each individual the tools they need to be successful, and that's equity. So from this point, we can actually make real change. We all know that we have unconscious biases, and many of you would have probably had training on this before, but talking about the fact that we have biases doesn't create change. So this is about conscious inclusion, the skills we perform, and this is how we combat the inequalities exacerbated by bias. Has anyone got any reflections before we get into the research? Feel free to raise a hand, pop it in the chat. No? Okay, can we get into the research then, please, Jenny?
We can, yeah, but I think we'll certainly draw on some of that as we go through, so it is very relevant. So, yeah, so we looked at the findings in a number of different themes, and safety, comfort and belonging was the first one of those because it's so fundamental. We did find, and as I've already mentioned, that Black students felt quite a significantly lower sense of belonging in their accommodation than white students, and similarly with comfort and feelings of safety. And it was things like, it does draw on that privilege exercise that Sam's just taken you through. So if you never have to worry about where you're going to get your hair done, for example, is an example of privilege. That came out really strongly for students, particularly if they were going to a different town or city, and they didn't know where they were going to get their hair care. They didn't know where they were going to get the sorts of foods that they like to eat. Other people in their flat would make comments about the food that they were cooking because it was different from the food that they were used to. And also things like racial profiling, comments that were made, just being made to feel not part of the community. So that was, you know, kind of a multifaceted thing really, that came back through the research. I've already mentioned in terms of environment, the culturally relevant services. It was also about, are there people who look like me and in some universities the answer was yes, and in others the answer was no. So we've been doing a little bit of work with a postgrad student who is at the University of Bath, where it's not very ethnically diverse, and she's actually written a blog for the HEPI website about that experience and those of others. Are there staff that look like me? And again, if the answer is no, it sort of enhances that sense of otherness. A really interesting one that's caused a lot of debate is that some students thought their accommodation had been racially segregated. We were quite surprised to hear that, but it was quite a strong finding that came through the focus groups. We don't believe that anyone is purposely segregating students on the basis of their race. It seems like that it is an unintended consequence of the ways of allocating or self-allocation based on the price, perhaps, of the accommodation. So that was quite an interesting finding, but incredibly damaging actually to the students who perceived that to be the reality. In terms of policies and procedures, pretty much no one in the focus groups thought that there were policies and procedures in place to report racist incidents, and it polled quite low in the survey as well. A lot of universities and private providers say they do have policies and procedures, but are quite quick to acknowledge that maybe they're a bit too generic, maybe they're not very well communicated, and maybe not 100% followed through. So it's not just having a policy that sits in a drawer, it's about, are Black students, when they are facing a racist incident, are they knowledgeable and comfortable about how to report that, and will that actually result in some change? What will that experience be for them? Because actually the trust in the process is extremely low at the moment. Experiences of racism, we've touched on it already because it sort of permeates everything, but more than half of Black students in the survey had been the victims of racism in their accommodation. And it was a whole range of things, from microaggressions to slurs, racist comments, exclusion, profiling, and some violent incidents as well. But all these types of incidents did have an impact on students. And while there was evidence of staff and students confronting racism, it was not as prevalent as we would want, I think. So that was really one of the big findings. And then finally, the impact this had on mental health. So 75%, 3/4 of Black students saying racism had an impact on their mental health. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, it's really compounded by the fact that it's actually very difficult to find therapists who understand that context of racism and have that lived experience themselves. So if you're going for therapy for your mental health and you have to put in all that work to explain to a counsellor why this is an issue and the impact it's having on you, that's not very therapeutic. So actually the way the system is and the way the demographics of counsellors and mental health support is, it's really weighted against Black students in terms of getting that support that they need. And there are very low numbers of Black therapists available, which is an issue that we've started to look into. So we've got experiences there of students dropping out of university. We've got experiences of students really kind of being dismissed in terms of their mental health and the impact that racism has had on their mental health. So I'm not going to go through all the recommendations. There were 10 of them. I think they're quite, we managed to, over a period of time, whittle them down into something that was, I think, quite practical. We have started to look at them in 4 different buckets when we're thinking about action that we can take on the basis of them. And I'll tell you what they are. So the first one is integration. So how do we enable students all students to integrate well and operate well in a multicultural community? Knowledge and data. So do we really know what's happening? And I think that this research has taught us, no, we didn't know what was happening. Training and recruitment of staff. So both are equally important, and that's being seen as maybe quite a quick win, particularly the training side. And creating safe spaces in the sense of making student accommodation a safe space to be if you are a Black student. So there's quite a lot to that. That's the biggest area. And that encompasses things like the policies and procedures, as well as just the sort of the climate and the culture within that accommodation. So at this point, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions about the findings before we go on to talk about what to do about it. And I'm just going to temporarily stop sharing my screen at this point. I'm thinking that's a no, but if people do have questions or comments or any thoughts at all, just please feel free to put them in the chat. I should say that absolutely no wrong questions and no wrong comments. It's something that we really kind of need to get a handle on as a sector, and you know, we are going to have to. I've learned a massive amount while going through this research, and which means that before I was relatively ignorant, and I'm, you know, happy not to be now. But you know, we all have to go through that phase where we're asking maybe, you know, what seem like silly questions, but there are no silly questions. It's just really important to talk about these things. One of the things that
sorry, just to interrupt you there,
oh, yeah,
Jenny, we've got a hand up from Anna.
Oh, brilliant. Anna, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to say I picked up on a couple of the points that you made from the findings of the report around making policies clear and procedures clear for how to report racist incidents. And we've recently introduced some new posters around our accommodation blocks branded around "It's not okay," and it's all about kind of reporting racist incidents if you're experiencing it. So the posters all have like a QR code on them that scans them and takes them to a place where students can kind of report, give details so we can reach out to them if they want, but also report anonymously if that's how they choose to report. So that's something I know our university, Lancaster, is starting to roll out, and that I was really keen to kind of get that information up in my accommodation to support some of my students. And then the other one about the stat about how Black students had only kind of seen 40% of staff intervening in kind of incidents of racism. Another thing that we're rolling out at the moment that I'm due to do shortly is we're doing some bystander training. So knowing how to, when you witness those incidents, knowing how to kind of intervene and help kind of deal with the situation and provide the support that students need. So it was, whilst there's still a lot for us to do, and I'm sure when I read the report and read those kind of 10 recommendations, there's going to be a lot of things I look at and think we can be doing more on that. It's good to see that there are already some areas where I think as a university we're working towards addressing some of the concerns.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that, Anna. It's great to hear that. How much take up have you had in terms of people reporting racism?
I don't know, because that's not data that is shared with me in my role as accommodation manager. So we will have a team that kind of centrally in the university monitors that. So in terms of how successful it's been, my honest answer is that I don't know. But hopefully, you know, somewhere down the line that those stats and that information will start to be shared with us a bit more.
Oh, that's great, thank you. So I'm going to in a moment hand over to Sam to talk about some of the actions that we're taking as a sort of a starter for this the second half, which is about actions. But before I did that, I just wanted to say a few things about the case for change, because having gone through those findings now many times, clearly there is a strong case for change on social justice grounds. I think no one would dispute that. But it also strikes me how strong a business case for change there is as well. Now, having worked in universities for many years before coming to the private sector, I think a business case for change is equally important in both, in my experience, because in both cases you're probably looking at investing in some of the changes that need to be made, and money is tight wherever you work. So I think just from the most cynical commercial sort of points of view, if you're trying to fill beds and you are unattractive to a sort of a slice of the market, to put it in that way, and you are you have a way of operating that is disenfranchising for a group of students, that maybe is causing a high level of dropout than you would want, then just commercially that doesn't stack up. Why would you not want to be as welcoming and as have a produce a great experience for all the students that might want to come to live in your accommodation? And one of the things that we have heard since we launched the research is just so many anecdotes about Black students choosing not to move away from home or choosing to stay in their home city because of some of these issues. And that's from people who went to university many years ago and people who are going to university this year. So there is, in case it's helpful to you, a very strong business case for change and in investing in some of these actions as well. Sam, do you want to talk about some of the things that we're doing?
Sure. So it was great to come into a business, first of all, that was taking this seriously, and actually on arrival at Unite Students, almost immediately I met Jenny and kind of became part of the research team, and that was really affirming for me coming in this space, to be able to join a business that was not just talking about it but was actually doing something. However, as we all know, for many, many years, lots of research has been done around various topics and no real action or change has happened. So it was really important for us to make the research practical from an operational perspective, and we hope that we've done that. And it was also really important that we didn't just commit to doing the research, but also to actions as a result of it. So there are a number of things that we're doing at Unite Students. Firstly, mainly the commission, which I think we talk about a little bit later in some more detail, which is looking at all of the recommendations on a national scale. And then individually as Unite Students, what are we doing? So first of all, we are aware of the impact on mental health, and we really wanted to partner with people who knew what they were talking about to be able to support our students a lot better. So I'm currently talking to Student Minds, who are also on the commission, but also the Black African Asian Therapy Network, who will be looking to develop we will be funding some training for Black therapists, and that's to help increase the numbers of Black therapists in overall within the UK. We know that there are very, very few. They're often overworked because the demand is quite high, particularly after 2020 and the death of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. It's become more apparent throughout the pandemic, the focus that people have on their mental health, and there just simply aren't enough. And whilst we may not be able to fix racism as an organisation, we can support our students and employees a lot better in this space. We are also working on developing a lot of our policies and procedures, particularly the ones in this space. Very shortly, we'll be launching our 3-year plan, our strategy around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging and wellbeing, which is a nice long title for you all. And that will kind of tell you what our plans are for the next 3 years. And within that, we've included a policy review. And what was really important in this space is that we lent into the voices of the people that these policies affect. So I think we had this conversation in part at QVO, but there's absolutely no point in having policies that people don't understand and that they haven't contributed to. So our new diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging policy has been taken through a number of stages, one of which was focus groups with employees from around the business, and also external focus groups with people like Stonewall, for example, to ensure that we are not just best practice organisation-wide, but also out in wider society. And that is something that we will also be sharing externally, and we think it's important to do that because hopefully it will trigger others to take the same sort of action and look at those policies, and particularly from a student-facing perspective, ensuring that students know they exist is like right at the top of the list. It's really clear from the research that they don't know that they exist, and that's kind of a starting problem. Where do you go and who do you go to, and how will it be dealt with? But also, what are the expectations? What are the behaviours that are expected from all students? They're not really very clear on that. Also detail throughout our strategies that kind of the piece around representation. So at the moment, we have just welcomed 9 interns from the 10,000 Black Interns programme, and that's really about developing our internal talent pipeline and diversifying it so that we can actually start to build representation authentically. I think one quote that always stays with me is, you cannot be what you cannot see. And for students, that representation throughout our business, both operationally and from the corporate function, is really important to them. And as we know, Gen Z are, voting with their money. They know where they're going, and they know what they're looking for. So it makes not just a moral case, but as Jenny mentioned earlier, the business case as well. I could probably go on for a couple of hours about this, so I'm going to hand back to Jenny to talk about some of the responses that we've had as we've gone around to different groups of people.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. Right, I'm going to try and share my screen again. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the United Students Commission on Living Black at University. It might be something that you're aware of, and we've already mentioned it. So this was one of those ideas that you have, and then you have to spend the next year of your life actually trying to find out how to put it into practice. But the idea is to get together a whole bunch of organisations working at a national level who can make change. They can make change in this sector and for this sector, and put together a commission that will, through its members and actions that they will take, can respond at a national level, which means doing things that will support universities and private providers to be able to implement the recommendations more effectively. So that sounds a bit theoretical, but it's going to be things like, what's in the national codes? What support is there to really understand how to do the policies and procedures side of things really well? How does that link up with the work of for example, the Office of the Independent Adjudicator, who have come on board as part of the commission, because they take escalated complaints from the sector. So how do we, first of all, draw on their expertise around complaints and how to do them well, but also make sure that whatever that we're doing on the ground around complaints and dealing with complaints of racism really articulates well with what they might get if that's not resolved locally. Similarly with the national code. What training is available? How is this reflected in people's conferences, for example? So a whole bunch of different things, some of which I'm sure we haven't even thought of yet, that can be done at the national level just to make it possible for universities and private providers really to respond well to those findings and those recommendations. So I will be keen to hear from you either now or later, and others maybe who are watching this as a recording, around what would really be helpful to you. What could the commission do that would be really helpful to you? So Sarah's already mentioned that Melissa Brown is the CURO representative. We also have representatives from ASRA, from Amoshi. We've got a representative from Advanced HE, Tara, who is leading on the Race Equality Charter for Advanced HE. So how is student accommodation going to be reflected within the Race Equality Charter? How is it going to be more attractive for universities who want to achieve the Race Equality Charter to do things in their accommodation as well as in their curriculum and other areas? We've got a really focused scope. It is about improving the accommodation experience for Black students in the UK in purpose-built accommodation, private and university halls. We've sometimes do get challenged on that scope, but we really think let's just solve this issue or at least address it. If we try and broaden that scope too much, we will end up not being able to address the issues that we're setting out to do. So while they're going to be positive implications, I think, for other students and maybe students in other countries, we're going to keep that really tight focus, and we're going to do this over the next year. So that's just what the Commission is. Before we go on to, so I'm going to go on to talk about some of the ideas that have come forward already. So I'm going to talk about ideas that have come from your conference and the ASRA conference as well. And I'm going to also, in a minute, talk about an idea that's come from the Commission already as well. So we had a session at the Cubo Res Life conference. Some of you may have been there. And it generated some really great ideas. So just a bit of a summary of the things that people felt that they could tackle, policies and procedures. So it was good to hear that that's already being looked at in a number of universities anyway. And it was felt that the first step is just to commit to the policies and do so in a visible way, and just, say that you're committed to reviewing these policies. It is a lot of work. There is a lot of consultation to be done as well to get that right. But the first step is to commit, and that's quite an easy step to take. There was a lot of talk about induction, particularly because the focus was Res Life, but the idea to include intercultural competence as a core element of students' induction into their accommodation. Some people do this already. I think there was an idea that it could be dialed up and made more specific, and for those who weren't doing it, it felt like a really good idea, because not only is it important to a good community within accommodation, it's just a really core skill as well when people go on into the workplace. Training felt like a quick win, I think, to a lot of people, sort of meaningful race training, but we have heard that there is a bit of a scarcity in terms of finding trainers. It's something that's been flagged up to us by Unipol, so we're hoping that that's something that maybe the Commission can take a look at a national level to support people. And then finally, allocations. So there was a lot of head scratching about allocations and why that there might be concentrations of students from particular backgrounds in particular buildings, but understanding that it does happen sometimes. And really it's your old-fashioned equality impact assessment. So whatever the allocations policy, or if there's no allocations policy, what are the unintended consequences of that policy, and how are they communicated, how are they mitigated? And at the end of the day, if nothing else, just be really clear as to what that allocations policy is and why students are living where they are. So there were the ideas that came back already. I'm just going to go back because so an idea that came forward at the National Commission meeting was really about something that Cubo members can do as quite a quick win, but quite a powerful win to influence the private sector. And I know Melissa would have talked about it at length if she was here, because she's very passionate about it. But many universities do commission or tender for beds from the private sector. And many of them already have something in about EDI. There is an opportunity, we felt, to strengthen that up, particularly when it comes to race and the experience of Black students in particular. So there's an evidence base for this now. So what are the requirements on private providers to come forward themselves with some of these solutions and to be addressing the findings and addressing the recommendations as part of that tender process. So as a differentiator, and that's a way that QBO members can really, actually create quite a lot of change through their purchasing and tendering for accommodation. So I'm just going to throw that one out there. But I think that's really everything from us in terms of telling you things. But I'm really, really keen to hear from you. We're really keen to hear, what actions you can take, but also what would help you to take these actions. So that's something we can take back to the Commission if there is something that QBO can do. Sort of speaking on your behalf, Sarah, apologies. But if there's something that other organisations can do, whether that's Unipol or Student Minds or any Universities UK, any of these other organisations who are committed to the Commission, if there are ideas that you'd like us to take back to them, then we're very happy to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing now and see if we've got something in the chat. No, any questions, any thoughts, any general comments?
Also, any opinions about the tender process and strengthening the diversity requirements within that?
Be interesting to see those on the call, if there are any policies in place at the moment within your own individual institutions in terms of tendering process, and if there's kind of anything built into that at this stage. Everybody's gone quiet.
So it's not something I'm aware of at the moment, but I've actually just made a note to go back and ask some questions. So we a large chunk of our accommodation blocks are UPP blocks. So my question is going to be, the staff from UPP that go into those blocks, what kind of EDI training do they receive? Do they receive any? And see if we can start some conversations around that. And we also do an accreditation scheme for landlords that have properties off campus, that we accredit them and suggest that our students use accredited properties as a starting point. And I'm going to go back and ask the team that look after that, do we have anything around EDI that the landlords have to meet as part of the accreditation? Because I think that's a really interesting point as well to maybe look at exploring.
Thank you. It'd be good to know how that goes, actually.
Yeah.
And what kind of response you get.
I'll keep in touch.
That would be great. Any other thoughts? Mark?
Sorry, I'm fiddling with trying to turn a camera on.
It's not easy.
Apologies for joining late. There's a couple of things for me. It deals with everything post a student being in accommodation. So when they're there, it doesn't really deal with how do you address a sort of participation gap with BAME or Black students participating in university or private sector accommodation. And I'm not sure whether there's any work being done to, nationally to look at academic applicant percentages versus those similar groups applying into university or private accommodation. Because that's, for me, is the sort of the participation is the one bit first, but the next part for me is about how do you bring the policy to life? It's easy to write a policy. And we have a policy on equality and diversity and various things, and it really doesn't interest me. What really matters is how you can bring this to life. And I think importantly as well is that where you have city-based partnerships, so for example, Work Cardiff, we work with Uniting Cardiff, it should be exactly the same approach for our students and exactly the same response for our students, regardless of where they're staying and where they're living. So I think I don't have any answers. I'm here to learn, But it's a really interesting thing for me, and I'm really sort of struggling to how we can do better, really. I don't think we're doing any worse than anybody else, but I really want to understand about how we can do better. And, it's a useful piece of research. It was interesting. I'd say that there's nothing that surprised me in it, unfortunately. But, on paper, it's something, but, in reality, this is a cultural piece. This is about how you change, not just where you're living, it's about your experience throughout the whole university and, broader society. And we can't change that, but it can't just be addressed in the accommodation bit. So it's a much bigger cultural piece around how do we sort of bring all of these various bits together. So sorry, I'm not helping. I'm sort of
it's a great questions though.
Yeah, and I think lots and lots of great points, and some of them I might be able to respond to. I'll start with policy and procedure. Whilst it kind of seems a bit of a boring way to start, it is kind of the principles by which we work on. So it's foundational. And I think that when you are from a protected characteristic, any protected characteristic, it's often the first place you look. So, for example, not me in particular, because I'm looking for the problems that I can fix. But if I was looking at where I wanted to go and live or where I wanted to work, I would go as an intersectional woman and look at the policies and see if the company really is as inclusive as they say they are. So whilst it might not matter to people who don't identify with lots of protected characteristics, it does matter to those who do. So you will find that, particularly in the workplace, but not limited to, you'll find that trans people will be looking for your transitioning at work policies. People will be looking at maternity and paternity policies to see if they are inclusive for the LGBTQ community, and so on and so forth. So policy is a really great place to start. However, as you're completely right, it's how do you bring those policies to life? And one of the things that I've been looking at is actually a policy could just be a set of legislative responsibilities and statutory rights that people have, but it could also be a teaching and learning tool. So including things like behaviours and competencies as part of your policies gives people some accountability to work from. So I think it's using policy as a tool as opposed to just having a piece of paper is what brings it to life. I completely agree with you about the connection between the university hall experience and the private provider experience, and they should be one and the same, and that means working much more closely with between universities and providers. We are doing a pilot project with Newcastle University at the moment to try and integrate some of the findings from the research and also their race equality charter commitments and bring those two things together. So actually we are having stronger conversations and giving students the same experience across the board. So once we have the findings of that project, we definitely will be sharing those out. I don't know if I've answered all your questions, but I hope I've started with some of them.
Yeah, you did help. Thanks very much. It was really interesting, the point that you started off with is that people do look for policies as part of their initial inquiry. Would that include 18-year-old, prospective students? Because I'm pleased. So that does show a relevance and importance to, and making sure that they are front and center and easy to access.
They may look in a different way, I think. So I was trying to remember if I could remember any research on this. I think I vaguely recall something from probably the late 90s or early 2000s when I used to be a bit more active in research in this area about Black students self-selecting to go to places where they were quite confident there'd be other Black students. So I'll see if I can dig that out. But I've seen I've sort of seen the evidence of that as well. So I've seen students on Student Room talking about, I'm Black, will this be a safe place to live? Will there be other people like me? Yeah. And heard, as I say, quite a lot of anecdotes from people about themselves when they were students, about their kids who do or don't want to go away to university. So it's happening probably on the basis of the hot knowledge, what you know, who can tell you and give you advice.
That to me is
where your
probably
siblings
more,
went, where your cousins went, that sort of thing,
Yeah, that's what I was sort of assuming, things that this is going to be around the social, the local, the other networks that people will share this information and say that it's a good place, safe place, to live. And this is where I come back to, if you don't have a great participation now, how can you improve your participation in order to sort of change the culture and make this normal, if you see what I mean? So this is why I was starting with, it doesn't really deal with the bit around participation. It just deals with after you're there, if that makes sense. So, I'm not sure whether it would sort of eventually sort of be able to sort of contribute or help in that respect as well. I think it was that bit around you need to be able to see yourself in a place in order to sort of, feel that you could belong there, for example, or whatever it might be. So it's that sort of a little bit of a dilemma, I think.
I agree with you. I think there is another angle, which is you can't be diverse until you're inclusive. So it's creating the inclusive environment that comes first, mainly because actually if you do a lot of campaigning and bring in lots of Black students, if their environment that they come into is not a safe one or an inclusive one, they will still leave, they will still drop out, they still won't have great experiences. So it's the order in which we do this is really important. And if you don't have that representation already, or you don't have those positive stories already, policy is a good place to start. But it's not just having a policy, it's communicating it, and it's almost a way of you putting front and center, we welcome you, and these are the ways that we're going to support you. I don't necessarily think policy is a front-facing thing, but the communication of the expectations within that policy and the procedures that are in place is the bit that will draw students in.
Thanks for that. Sorry, I'll stop hogging it now.
Well, it's interesting, when we were talking with Joe Nuckley from the Office of the Independent Adjudicator, one of the things that we started to talk about is how you kind of make that complaints process come to life for the students, how you explain to them what will happen at different stages, how you explain to them what that might feel like, how you engage students in the process of communicating that as well, because raising a complaint about racism, even if the policies are really great, can be quite a difficult thing to go through. So how do you communicate what that's going to be like, what you can expect to happen as a result, where you can go to for support while you're going through that process, and that kind of humanizing it and communicating it in a way that addresses what students are thinking about when they need to go through that process. I think it has got a lot of mileage, and no doubt we'll be picking that up a bit more as we go through the commission. Anything else?
Really interesting so far. Has anybody else got any comments, suggestions, ideas? Nope. It's gone very, very quiet. So just taking things sort of further from here, Jenny and Sam, what are the next stages with regards to the commission and plans to kind of drive this forward? Just to kind of time, have you got time frames in mind, or?
Yeah, we do. So we've given ourselves a year, and we're looking at the recommendations in small clusters as we go through. So we're meeting every 2 months, lots of work in between, obviously. And we've said Melissa is the rep, so anything that QBO members do want raised or think would, I think the key question, the exam question really is, what would help you do these things? What would help you as QBO members put these recommendations into practice? What could QBO do? What could other organisations do that would really help? What's missing? What are the barriers? Because these are the sorts of things and the level of things that commission can tackle with the people around the table.
Fantastic.
So do feed those through.
Absolutely. I think there's so many ideas that we can start to kind of talk about amongst the members, that we can certainly sort of drive this forward. I think it's really exciting times in the sector as well to make sort of big changes as well. Just one last, just to see if anybody else has got any questions or comments. No. As I said, we have recorded this session today, so we will be sharing that amongst members later on today. Thank you once again to Jenny and Sam for your time today. Really appreciate it. A really, really good session, and it really is kind of eye-opening to see kind of everything that you've researched and have managed to report back on so far, and certainly lots of opportunities to make change. So I'll stop the recording there, and thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.